Hello, welcome back. Graham Bean, the former compliance officer, otherwise known as the FA's sleaze buster, former police detective in South Yorkshire, who then became an advocate for people that he was at the FA, if you like, prosecuting on their behalf. Very interesting football journey he's had. It's all in this book. Been there, done that. I highly recommend this. He pulls absolutely no punches. And neither does Keith Hackett, the former head of England's referees. We're going to talk about one or two chapters, Graham, in your book, including two on Chesterfield, which I'd rather have not read, but did know some of what was going on there. And it was a very sorry episode. But before all that, in part one, we failed to mention VAR. Now, I'm going to ask both of you in turn. I'm going to start with Graham. What do you think of VAR? Are you a supporter of it, or are you, like me, anti it?
Right. Well, as Keith knows in our regular social interactions about VAR, I'm very, very much against VAR. I think it's spoiled the game. I think that it is a tool that has become ridiculed. And for me, they could throw it in the waste paper bin, right at this moment, and go back to the old system. I think that the only technology that we should have in football is the goal line technology, whether the ball crossed the line or not. I think that the referees use VAR now as an additional insurance policy. So I'm very much against it.
Graham, you mentioned goal line technology. Keith, you were a prime mover in the introduction of goal line technology, which you've got to salute you. Apart from a couple of high-profile cases, it's worked superbly. Now, I know you've been an advocate of VAR. Are you still an advocate of VAR, or would you prefer that it had never darkened our door?
I think that's a really good question, and there's two sides to that answer, because I sit in the middle, and there are on occasions when I see what's going off and how it's negatively impacting on the game, I want it binned like Graham. But and of course, another reason behind that is that I can remember having a conversation with Nigel Owens, the brilliant rugby union referee. I wanted VAR to follow that same principle of the big screen, the open discussion. I'm still on that case, really. But what it has done is exactly what Nigel Owens said to me it would happen. It would create lazy referees, over-reliance on VAR. In good positions, they make good judgments, and they have the right viewing angles. You see, you recognise, you think and act. That's what a referee does. Sadly, we're seeing referees getting to position and not making a judgment, and they've got a life belt, they think, in VAR. And the way VAR is being operated in this country is nothing short of a disgrace. It's just not operated sensibly. It's not got the technical qualities that goal line technology has brought about. I helped write the criteria and work with Hawkeye on that development. It was quite simple in that, one, I don't want a referee involved in the process other than he's informed that the ball has crossed the line, nothing else. And to achieve that, and in a time frame which was also part of the process, we had it in 3 months, we had the system working, but it took a minute. And I'm saying it's got to be less than that. They kept saying why, and I'm going for credibility purposes. And to achieve that, there's 7 cameras around each goal, 500 frames per second. We're operating VAR on currently, I know we've got AI on the horizon, but we're operating it under the remit of broadcast speeds, which are around about 100 frames per second. It doesn't give you the level of accuracy that says a toe is an offside decision. And of course, the further complication that we've got is that gentleman that rewrote the laws to make them easier has done exactly the opposite. Because I can sit with a group of referees week in, week out and argue what is handball. And it's delivered on the field of play in a way that follows the wind rather than actually the laws of the game and how they pen. They penned very poorly because players will have their arms and hands extended beyond their body as a balancing mechanism. So I think that what we've got is we've got the complication of the law of offside and handball in particular, and VAR, right, being cast with those two at the same time. So I think that if it doesn't improve, then I'm going to be joining Graham's camp. And there are times I can tell you on a Saturday and Sunday when I watch Match of the Day, I'm in his camp of saying it wants binning because of the way it's being used and operated in this country.
And nobody knows what the handball law is anymore, or at least knows how it should be applied. Graham, interesting from Keith, very honest, that he's having second thoughts about his championing of VAR, which he thinks can work. We'll talk to him about Howard Webb and his potential influence coming back into the English game shortly. But Graham, bottom line to me, football is an entertainment. And anything that damages the quality of entertainment, the spontaneity, is taking away from the game. People say to me they've stopped celebrating goals. They're half celebrating and waiting. That cannot be right, can it?
You're absolutely right, Alan. It is, so the thrill of your team scoring a goal and the elation that you feel is being taken away because, suddenly in that moment you think, well, hold on a minute, VAR is going to check it in any event. And I think if you look last night at Liverpool, I think there was a stoppage of about 4 minutes to decide whether or not a goal stood for Napoli. And it's just taken out like you said, the spontaneity of celebrating a goal. And I think that the Mike Riley, who heads up the referees for the Premier League, some of the blame has to fall at his feet because of this, because of sort of not only the standard of refereeing, which is another subject entirely, but also the way that VAR is sort of implemented. And as I say, it just takes away sort of a lot of the enjoyment of the game because you don't know whether it's a goal or it isn't a goal until some seconds afterwards, at the very minimum.
Well,
Alan, I do think one of the components that's missing in this discussion, that is at the very top level with regard to VAR, is the fans and the fans' involvement and how they accept it. And they've almost switched off, haven't they? They switch off and start defending the use of VAR, and then they don't have joined up thinking. First of all, I've mentioned the law. I've mentioned the offside law. Philip Don and I, when we helped to set up the Premier League, by that I mean the referees, the PGMOL, we chatted at length with managers and players about the offside law, and they all were on the same page. Give the benefit of the doubt to the forward in order that we're not using offside as an added defender that rules out goals. And anybody that has any love of football, and I know we three do, and many of your viewers will, can't help but relate to the fact that the offside law has become a joke. When you're ruling goals out because the toe of a player is offside, it's just take the natural ability of a player, and in terms of his hands and arms, and in terms of his feet placement, and if he's if he's a foot offside, this gap between the bodies is offside. It's that definite. We all buy into it. But I have discussions with other referees that don't necessarily buy into the fact that it's offside. And so when I go and watch Penistone Church and I'm back to no VAR, no goal line technology, I'm seeing increasing numbers of people coming to our games because they can have a pint and stand there and have a chat and a disagreement with the referee's decisions and other fans. And if I'm watching on television, I know what VAR is going to do, generally, by way of being informed. And if I'm in the stadium, all I get on a screen, and not at Liverpool and Manchester United because they haven't got one, is I get a notification that they're looking at the goal. And it just takes away the fans' enjoyment. I recognise that. And I'm saying it's not operating correctly. So why don't you do something about it?
Well, the man who potentially can do something about it is Howard Webb, who was a protege of yours. You helped him develop his career all the way through to being a World Cup final referee. And he's since made a success of managing referees in MLS in America and Canada. And he is back here to take charge. They're giving him a fancy title, but effectively he's going to be Premier League referees manager or referees manager across the professional game, starting, I think, in early December. Now, Keith, I know you're an advocate of that appointment. I'm going to come to you in a moment. Graham, you're no fan of Mike Riley either. Do you see this as a step in the right direction then?
No, absolutely. I think that Howard Webb has sort of refereed the biggest game that anybody could referee, which is the World Cup final, as well as also the games sort of beyond that, such as the Champions League final, etc. But when you look at the mess that Mike Riley has made of sort of the refereeing standards in this country, it's a disgrace that he should have been out sort of years ago. Howard Webb's exactly the right person that they need to bring in. That sort of is got an outlook that is open to change, and I'm sure that Howard will improve sort of the standards, and the acceptance of referees, by supporters. Referees will always sort of be an enemy to supporters if they're not giving decisions in favour of their team. But I think overall, it can only be for the good of the game that someone like Howard Webb is in charge of them now.
Keith, over to you. What sort of an impact is Howard going to make, and how difficult is it going to be?
Well, I think it's going to be easy because, as Graham has said, and I totally concur, my views on Mike Riley. I've been saying them for the last 6-7 years. It was the wrong choice in the first place because I knew the guy. I knew his lack of management skills, his lack of communication skills. And therefore the stakeholders are going to be left in the air. But I think in terms of refereeing, the standard has declined. And you see the world of refereeing becoming very difficult because we're not recruiting sufficient numbers. And therefore at grassroots level, there's a massive shortage of referees, but nobody will admit it. We run level 5 at the North East Counties League, and we are searching for assistants, and if we don't get them, the game would be called off. So I think that Howard Webb comes in. I know him well. I know his dad, so he's got a sounding board with his dad, who's dead straight, common sense guy who knows grassroots refereeing inside out, and will advise Howard, because I think it's the outside advice that he absorbs. And then he's got the courage, and he's got to have the courage, which I think his police background gives him, is the ability to be able to communicate with those people that are not performing well. We've got to get back to a system that I put in place, which is publicly showing that there's a level of accountability when referees do make consistently poor decisions, or like a footballer, he's failing to put the ball in the back of the net. He gets coaching skills. Referees get advice, operational advice, and you then get them up to speed. So you're using standard management techniques, communication skilds, in order to say, I want the very best referees refereeing at the top level.
Is Howard, Howard's a nice guy. Is he so are you, but you're a tough operator, Keith, if I may say so. Has Howard got it in him to be that ruthless? drop referees summarily if they deserve dropping. 2 or 3 games, for instance, poor games.
I don't think it's an easy task when you do that, Alan. You don't suddenly boast about it. I mean, people think I boasted about it. I needed to show publicly to all the stakeholders in the game that if a referee had a poor match, there was a consequence to it. They're paid professionals. They're earning 100,000 plus a year. And just like employing a salesman, if a salesman doesn't get sales, then he gets operational advice and he might lose his job. It's a business in which you're paying paid professionals to do the work, and you want them to do it at an adequate level. What I see is I've seen a decline in fitness standards, a decline in mobility and movement on the field of play, and I've seen wrong referees being put in wrong games. I'm very uncomfortable with a guy who lives in Altrincham refereeing the 2 Manchester clubs. I'm uncomfortable by that, but that might be my background in the way that I was brought up as a referee. I knew that there was a lot of discussion, Alan, when I was appointed to one of my early games at Chesterfield, because they're saying, well, that's 15 miles away. And the argument was, it's Derbyshire, not South Yorkshire. But all those things have been changed.
Yeah, we're going to come to Chesterfield with Graham. But just before we do, just very briefly, is Howard Webb going to bring some common sense to the application of VAR?
I would hope that he would do that through good communication, Alan. I do think that's his task. And I've got to tell you, if he doesn't, then I'm on his case. I might know him, and he might be regarded as a friend, but I write for the Daily Telegraph, as you know, and therefore, as a result, if I'm asked a question by anybody in the media or on social media, I give a blunt, honest answer. Yeah, and people don't like it, but that's the very nature of being a Yorkshireman, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that Graham Bean would associate with everything that you've said there, and from deepest Yorkshire in Barnsley as well. Chesterfield is close to my heart, and my heart, along with match-going Spire-Rights fans, I only attend when I can, when I'm not working elsewhere. Those hearts were broken during a desperate period that is in your book when you talk about a roll of shame, to quote you, and quoting, every day was a crisis day at Chesterfield. This was some episode, Graham.
Oh yeah, I seem to be a little bit of a red Adair when it comes to football clubs. So I went into Leeds United under Cellino, and I had that, and then I went into Chesterfield, and that was just as bad. And the reality at Chesterfield was that Dave Allen had been the owner, and in fairness to Dave, I don't really know how Chesterfield supporters can complain about him, because had it not been for Dave Allen, then there wouldn't be a football club in its current state, because of the amount of money that he put in and wrote off when he sold it to the community trust. But the reality is that it just went from one crisis to another, even on the most simplest of things. And there was just a black cloud over the club, and because of all the issues that the club had, then the rebellions from the supporters had gone too far to bring it back.
It was the way it was operated on Dave Allen's behalf, really, and perhaps he took his eye off the ball too much around that time. But happily, the club is recovered. I'm going to ask you about Cellino and Leeds. I mean, you couldn't make up some of the stuff. I mean, you had this tempestuous relationship, didn't you, with this hot-headed Italian? What was that like?
Oh, you can look back on it now and laugh about some of the things that happened, but at the time the pressure of working for him was so intense, and his volatile personality was such that it was like walking on eggshells 24/7. And people have said to me that I know in the game, I was the only one that's ever stood up to him, and Cellino was the typical spoiled man that everybody said yes to as opposed to no, and I came from a different mold and said no at times, And it sort of, I think that the fact that I stood up to him sort of didn't go down too well with him. But I say you live and learn. But it were a very, very stressful sort of few months that I was working there.
Yeah,
and some of the stories that I put in the book are just mind blowing, that you couldn't even start to make them up.
Yeah, and is that one of the reasons why you sort of reflect on your time in football with perhaps some disillusion and regret?
Yeah, I look back and think, if I had my time again, what would I do? And I always sort of come back to the fact that it was my a calling to a certain extent of, with my police background to sort of, I feel that was I was sort of here to do, to sort of put bad people in prison. And as a detective, that's what I did. And I do regret sort of taking that step into football, because I wish I would have stayed as a detective. But at the time, it seemed like a really good move for me, and I took it. So, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. But as I say, what's done is done, and I say, don't get me wrong, I had some really good times in the game, but I think overall, I think if I had the choice of the two careers, I would have stuck with the police career.
Putting bad people in prison.
Yeah, putting bad people in prison, because that's, irrespective of all sort of the issues that the police have these days, and so the criticism that they get, the thing that the public wants to see is them putting bad people in prison, and that is what that's what a policeman's job is, as far as I'm concerned, or certainly a detective's job. And
keeping law and order on a football field has been your job and your profession, Keith. I know you still watch referees actively at a lower level too. And just finally, are we going to attract sufficient referees because of this culture of abusive language, but also abusive behaviour physically towards them at lower level, which is incredibly concerning. And we don't seem to be moving forward to eliminate this, do we?
No, I think it's a difficult period in that scenario for grassroots football. They are getting abuse. We as a league have been quite clear. We've gone out and said we want a 20-minute sort of period at the end of the game where the manager doesn't speak or even approach the match referee. They just let him get off the field. There are other areas where I do think the Football Association could bring in, clubs or promote the idea of a referee liaison officer. They have it at the Football League and Premier League level. They don't have it at grassroots level. Someone who can actually, if the parents getting a bit out of order, give them a tap on the shoulder and remind them of their responsibilities, because we're attracting younger referees, 15, 16-year-olds into the game. They don't have the maturity, yet the parents are comparing them to Howard Webb. They're expecting them to perform like Howard Webb. The passion comes out and they're looking after their little lad and they want their little lad to perform. It makes life very difficult. So I do think that the appointment of a liaison officer for every club, I know that Football League have got now moving towards the idea of a points deduction in terms of their sort of penalties that they can invoke.
Really? I've not heard that. Is that something that you've heard?
I was informed a couple of days ago when I sort of was annoyed by the fact that Klopp, who's obviously one of the high-profile managers, was only fined £30,000. I thought that was a drop in the ocean for something that he was doing on his approach was fairly in the face of match officials on a fairly regular basis, and coming out of the technical area, all those sort of things, and but at the same time, his reaction was to the fact that Anthony Taylor, with a very clear foul on Salah, didn't blow for the free kick. So in a way, you're looking at it from two angles. Just saying, why didn't that referee give the free kick? Because that was Klopp's reaction was based on that. What he could see, his player had been fouled, was on his backside, and the referee completely ignored it, and so did the assistant referee. But that probably doesn't give him the license to do what he did, come out the area into the face of the assistant.
No, when you say points deductions, is this actively being considered, do you think, Premier League and EFL?
I don't think he'll get anywhere near the Premier League and the Football League, Alan. I think we're talking about the protection of referees at grassroots level with the possible introduction of body cameras, being trialled as another, it's taken them about 5 years to agree to that.
So and we're talking about non-league. We're talking about the protection of grassroots referees in order to retain them. Because at the moment, the problem is, it's costing them 150 quid, by the way. It's costing them probably about 400 quid to get into referee. You've got to put that with the fact that it cost me nothing. Yeah. So the FA is suddenly making money out of the idea of promoting people to become referees when it ought to be free, to ensure that every game that comes under their management control, that's every game, as a referee, as a match official. And when you talk about points deductions, I think you're talking non-league as well as EFL, and it's being kicked around, if you like, in the game. Look, Keith and Graham, thanks very much indeed. Our time has run out, but it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to both of you. Keith, all the very best. Look forward to your book when it comes out. Graham, there's yours, already out there. Been there, done that, and very good luck with it. I do thoroughly recommend it. Get it in time for Christmas. Gents, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon. I'm going to take a bit of a break during the World Cup. Might be back with the show next week. Not quite sure yet, but keep you informed. Thanks for watching. See ya. Bye-bye.